I'm Tobias from Astralis, and welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. It's a joke-free zone.
While Astralis' dominance in 2018 has been truly amazing, winning so many titles, even when they don't win, often being in the final, pretty much always being in at least the semi-final, that's a bad result for them, is reach the semis and don't go any further, and even then usually lose to the champion if that's the case. Despite how outrageously good Astralis has been, for a top team, for a number one team in the world, they faced a lot of criticism from fans, and they've had general, at times, sentiment of certain portions of the fan base go against them. People accuse them of being boring or just exploiting elements within the game, etc. I thought a good analogy for them as a team, and a way for people who maybe are more casual fans or they just like watching crazy, exciting play, to get kind of an in on Astralis and start to appreciate what's great about them, would be to draw an analogy to the legendary MMA, mixed martial arts welterweight champion, Georges St-Pierre, who, this is someone who was the best welterweight fighter in the world for many, many years. He's a contender for the best fighter of all time in MMA or any combat sport. He cleared out his entire division in the UFC when the UFC had a very strong welterweight division. Twice, he faced all the contenders. He legitimately did beat all the contenders. The only one you could make a case he maybe didn't beat and the judge decision was wrong was maybe the Hendricks fight. I might edge that one. The rest of them, he was clearly the better fighter. Sometimes by a large margin, sometimes by a small margin, but he beat everyone, and didn't matter what your tool set was, nobody could stop this guy, and he was a truly dominant champion. He was also, while on the one hand, very popular as a pay-per-view draw, partly, in fact, perhaps because he was from Canada, and when they had events there, they always popped off. But you know what? He also got criticised a lot. A lot of people said he didn't finish fights, or when you get to the discussion of who's the greatest fighter of all time, well, all the other candidates for the greatest fighter of all time are knocking people out, are choking people out, having very exciting fights. People often accuse Georges St-Pierre of having boring fights, of because they're all decisions, and a lot of them are him just smothering the other guy, whether that's with wrestling, whether that's with his jab, whether that's with just good movement and cardio. People felt as though, for whatever reason, it was somehow cheap or it wasn't as good. What you need to appreciate is what Georges St-Pierre was doing with his game. Because the main strength Georges St-Pierre had, basically, was the ability to neutralize whatever the key strength is of the opponent. It didn't matter what the opponent was. That was his main quality that allowed him to be a champion, despite being very talented and very athletically gifted himself, and someone who worked on that a lot and had his own weapons. He was so well-rounded that, because he has all these weapons, he can just look at your weapons and say, right, which one of my weapons, if I use them, would actually allow his weapon to be potentially viable against me or counter me or be dangerous in some way, right? Let's get rid of that. Let's just pick the weapons I have that he has no answer for, and whatever his weapons are, let me counter that. Let me do everything that neutralizes that, limits that, makes that less effective, outright shuts it down entirely, depending on the player. So if he was playing against... If he was in a fighting rather against a very dangerous striker, then he would make sure to wrestle them. He would make sure to use his jab initially, and then when they go to try and fight him, push him up against the cage, get him with ground and pound, wear them out by doing all that so they don't have the legs under them to hit later on, they don't have the strength in the later rounds. If he was fighting against a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu master, he'd make sure that he fucked them up on the feet, that if he wrestled them, he didn't give them any openings when they were on the bottom, he didn't try a very dangerous ground and pound from within their guard, etc. It didn't matter what, if they were a wrestler, even though there were people with much better wrestling pedigree than him, he knew how to neutralize their wrestling by being better at it, by seemingly being stronger for his weight, by having extra technique that he'd worked upon, by having amazing cardio. All these aspects, maybe they're not quite as good in these areas. Likewise, Astralis has been amazing at making opposing teams look worse. About the only team that's ever looked good realistically against Na'Vi on any consistent basis is probably Na'Vi. Na'Vi's had some pretty good games against them and has been able to get their style off. Everyone else has either had occasional games that were good. Fez had that amazing game I Am Chicago, and at the beginning at Katowice. Then you go and you look at like MIBR's had some good matches against them, even beat them in best of three. Still didn't look like significantly better than them or anything. Other than that, every team, including the ones I've named, they've also just smashed. They've also just taken care of very easily. They've also dismantled entirely and made them look worse than they do against others. Same goes for star players in the game. You look at people like Simple, like Nico, like Coldzera. They look less impactful against Astralis. They can't get off what they want to get off against Astralis. They can't play their style in the same way and have the same success against Astralis. If you put a team like FaZe Clan against a team like Na'Vi, FaZe Clan might win as they did at Epicenter, but Simple will still go off. You can't stop him going off if you're FaZe Clan. You don't have any of the tools to do that. You can't even game plan around what to do against him. If you go against Simple or you go against Coldzera and you're Astralis, you really can limit these guys even when they're at their absolute peaks. You can make them play worse. You can make them have an average game, and in doing so, massively open up the chances for you to be the one who wins that game. Now, both of people, GSP and Astralis, their strength to do this comes from very strong fundamentals. So I've said GSP had wrestling base, which actually he didn't come from initially. He came from a karate base, so he had some stand-up. He got very good at boxing with Mike Winklejohn and got like fantastic jab, one of the best jabs in MMA. Obviously, he had pretty solid BJJ, even though he never really finished people with any submissions, but he was a threat in some senses, and at least he knew what he was doing on the ground, so no one was ahead of him in that regard. The guy really had a complete skill set, had amazing cardio, very well conditioned, very well trained and prepared every time. Likewise, Astralis has amazing role balance. They have just the right players in all the different roles that complement each other. They have very stable players who will play a consistent match, game in and game out, and no matter what stage of the tournament is, they have a tactical basis, meaning they can get very in-depth on what they want to do and make it difficult for you to know what they do or how to counter all the different variations that come off, the different routes that they're going to run in the game, the different attempts that they're going to make. They have very good comms, meaning that they can adapt to what you're doing and they can make sure they have full information, better information than the other team. And they have amazing protocols of when do we go through this smoke? How do we retake this site? How do we follow up an initial entry that sort of didn't work and the first guy died, but then the second guy killed a guy and opened the spot? Do we go there? Do we go back? Their comms and their protocols absolutely flawless. And as a result, they can adapt to what you're doing and try and take away a strength, or they can just take away strengths from the get-go and say this is going to be our game plan from the beginning of the match. Now that comes in part with both people, again, from their coaching background. In GSP, people like, obviously, Jackson Wink, that camp he was with. You saw in his early days, he had times where he had issues and didn't always game plan correctly against people. When he was with these guys, he had some of the best game plans in all of MMA. You can argue they made the sport more boring or they ruined the sport by point fighting. That's not his fault. Hit the fucking game, not the player in that scenario, right? So he did what he needed to, and they had a very big impact on GSP, especially over the latter half of his career. Well, likewise, Zonic was in Astralis ever since Astralis was formed, so we're talking like early 2016. But with Carrigan's much more of a self-sufficient in-game leader who's going to do it his way, and he doesn't want as much prep from his coach, and his coach won't have as much impact. Zonic mainly there was more about a glue guy, taking care of the players' mentalities, deciding who gets cut, and being someone responsible in that sense. You've seen with Glaive, Zonic has become much more impactful, and as each year, every 6 months goes by, it feels like he has more impact on the lineup, and he's being able to help them as a result game plan better, and figure out tendencies of the opponent better, and how they can play and grind a little bit extra efficiency out of what's already an amazing game. Both fighters, by the way, very efficient fighters. That's why they can both go into the deep waters against anyone and survive. That's why they can both take shots early and come back and still win the match, win the fight, whatever you would call it in that sense. They can have times where they use one strength in one area of the game and then switch up and use another strength elsewhere. This is stuff you can't take for granted. This is amazing shit. It might not look as flashy. It's not the same as knocking someone out or having a crazy 4K in a round out of nowhere that should have been lost. That looks more exciting. This in some ways can be just as impressive, or it's impressive in a different particular way. Georges St-Pierre, also funnily enough, is someone who he had very few finishes. He had a lot of decision games. Well, likewise, why do people call Astralis boring? Because either they just look like they cruise past you without players individually popping off, in which case it just looks boring, or they make it look impossible, like it's unfair, like the other team don't have the chance to. So in the same way as when people were fighting against GSP, the real reason people said GSP was boring is because they'd be a massive fan of the guy he was fighting, Nick Diaz, Carlos Condit, and they'd be like, wow, I can't wait to see this guy go and show his best against GSP. Then he'd fight GSP and they'd go, oh, he never got a chance to, he couldn't hit, GSP wouldn't fight him, or he was running away from him, or he just wrestle-fucked him. And what they really mean is, I want GSP to just stand there, let my favourite fighter try BJJ techniques on him, punch him, like just brawl and bang. Like, they're basically just mad that they want a more simplistic version of MMA to win out over GSP style, and they're not acknowledging at all that it's not that their fighter couldn't do it, get off. He couldn't because GSP was stopping him. That's the key point to understand here. When Astralis just shut down a whole Inferno CT side and you can't do shit against them, that isn't failure of the T side and the in-game leader of the opponent. That's an incredible CT team play display that you're not going to see from very many other teams, not least because CT side of Inferno is so hard to play. When you see Astralis just roll over teams on their T-side, when it's a fucking CT-sided map and win way more T-sides and T-rounds than anyone else in the game, that's not anything to do with like, oh, they wouldn't fight properly or play properly. They're doing something no one else in this game can do. That's the level of greatness we're talking about, which is why it makes the opponent look bad. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand from an aesthetic point of view or from casual fans' point of view, it's not as thrilling. Like in MMA, you want to see the crazy heavy hitters or the like wild finishes. You want to see Anderson Silva just counter punch people and knock them the fuck out and be in the Matrix. You want to see Fedor just come out of every possible scenario against every fighter and just beat them the fuck up no matter what and any way he wanted to, from their guard if he wants to. You want to see in CS, FaZe Clan just pop off all over the map with Nico going ham and Ramin amazing and Guardian getting ridiculous AWP clutches. You want to see the classic Fnatic lineup go off and just tear everyone up with Olaf as the fucking man and Crims just consistently fragging, JW doing crazy wild card shit all over the map. But that doesn't change the fact that it's a different skill set, a different difficulty level. Both of them also have incredible staying power. So funnily enough, in their early days, I mean, anyone who saw GSP with his first fight against BJ Penn, or when he fought against Matt Serra the first time, these guys were considered people who you could crack. And if you cracked them early, you could pressure them. A lot of people actually felt like GSP actually lacked a little bit of heart, like he could get afraid and you could put him on the back foot and you could pressure him like Matt Serra did, like GSP did, like BJ Penn did in that first fight for the first couple of rounds. But you know what? In the latter days, and now you look at current Astralis and GSP in the latter days as a welterweight, they became unbeatable. They became the final boss. The way they developed in terms of mindset of always being in a game, not letting themselves get so they get too afraid of the opponent or overwhelmed by him, or so his skill set's just going off and they're not able to do anything. Staying in there. They were the guys who really were able to do this. Now, intelligence is a factor that has to be cited for both. Two of the most intelligent fighter, most intelligent team, two of them we've ever had in this game. And so much of that then aids the game planning, aids even in the fight how you intuitively react because you've thought so much about it already. Both also very innovative people. Georges St-Pierre, people might not know this, he was doing stuff like gymnastics to train extra cardio elements. He was practicing kicks, even though he wasn't in particular a kicking fighter. He was practicing lots of different techniques from other martial arts to see if he could gain anything, judo, tosses, etc. He's studying film of his opponents all the time to break them down. It's likewise with Astralis. We've seen what they've done with utility. We've seen how they've been able to seemingly level up their comms, how they've been able to break apart game film of the opponent, look at their own demos, improve from mistakes they made in games and tournaments they won, so that they win the next tournament as well, instead of the next tournament being where someone else figures out a weakness or something they did wrong, then you lose the tournament and then you fix it for the next one. No, they're fixing it before they even get to that point. That's why people like GSP and Astralis just stay on top. Nobody displaces them. They can have a fight that's close, a game that's close. In Astralis' case, they can lose a game. They still pretty much always win the tournament. It doesn't matter. That's how incredible these people are. So the key, and this is the most important part of the video, if you still can't kind of get into either of these individuals, whether it's the Astralis people or GSP, here's the key thing to think about. Three factors, three aspects to why they're able to do this that are key to appreciating them. Number one, you got to appreciate how good the opponent is against everyone else. So Carlos Condit was a fucking killer against everyone else because he had such a versatile skill set himself and was so dangerous and decisive as a fighter. So he was a very dangerous fight for everyone else. Against GSP, GSP won overall convincingly, even though there was that moment he got rocked. Thiago Alves, this is a long time ago now, when he went to face GSP, he was fucking people up with Muay Thai and kickboxing. He was so dangerous for most people. A lot of people said GSP could get knocked out in that fight. GSP just smothered him, used BJJ against him, was never in danger against this guy. Nick Diaz against everyone else was a cardio machine. Incredible, like, dirty boxing. Incredible, like, ability to just wear people out. Obviously, he has pretty good BJJ himself. He very rarely ever had to use it. Didn't like to wrestle, which is his key flaw. But okay, he was doing this stuff against everyone else. Again, this guy could beat anyone in the world. Likewise, FaZe Clan. They're godlike against so many other teams this year. Coldzera was the best player in the world in years gone past. Still can be very good now. Looks like nothing when he's in MIBR facing Astralis, all right? Simple might be the best player we've ever seen, ever in the history of Counter-Strike. To the extent that even shutting him down is still monster numbers in finals. He could win the fucking MVP award. Team Liquid has the pieces to be the best team in the world, maybe. Mousesports, very solid team. Can't get past Astralis. When you realise how good these teams are against other people, and these fighters are against other people, then you start to recognise the excellence it must have taken for GSP and for Astralis to shut down the key strengths of those people who are some of the best in the world at their key strengths, to take away the fragging power of Astralis, of FaZe Clan, to make Coldzera not a guy who's having massive impact on the game. You know how hard it is to take away your opponent's strength, beat him where he's weak. You have to do two things there. That's so difficult. Most people couldn't do that even if they wanted to. So with GSP, when he went against Jake Shields, who was one of the best BJJ guys in the world and had an amazing streak of wins at the time, he just boxed the fuck out of him, never gave him a chance to get his game on. When he went against strikers like Nick Diaz, like Carlos Condit, he just wrestled the fuck out of them. Just made sure he won that way and they neutralised their game and they didn't get a chance to strike. They weren't on their feet. Likewise, we've seen Astralis time and time again on specific maps. They've got an incredibly wide map pool against specific styles of play. Just shut it down, adapt. When they play against teams like FaZe and MIBR, they've played many times, and Na'Vi, they're even doing the game within a game and doing different things from what they would do against everyone else. They've got specific game plans. And here's the important thing. Step 3. Is to understand how fucking difficult step 2 is, where you try and shut down your opponent's strength. It basically relies on you being so good in multiple areas and him being not as good in so many areas that you can game plan to offset his main strength while not limiting your own ability and some of your own strengths, which will then allow you to win the game. The level of greatness we're talking about with these people is incredible and has to at least begrudgingly be admired, if not outright celebrated, for how incredible, how cerebral, how innovative, how disciplined, how consistent it is. Just absolutely amazing stuff. Now, I know in history they will probably be overshadowed by the flashy guys, just as Anderson Silva and Fedor and Conor McGregor will overshadow some of the things GSP did. Same thing in CS. People like NIP in the early days would get right at Forest, Fnatic with Olaf Meister and JW, even the Brazilians maybe with Coldzera and Fern Fall. These might overshadow them, but that doesn't take away the greatness of the people we're talking about and that they are the contenders for the best ever in their fields.
This video was kindly supported by Andreas, Snazore Westerlund, Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Landon Thompson, Tobias Bernasconi, OllieJ, NateDOhDoubleG, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, Daniel Yordanov, James Harding, VeXii, Robert Baxter, Lucas Kerza Szczesny, and a special thanks, as always, goes out to my man, Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest to feature in my upcoming content? Perhaps you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA. Do you want teasers from my upcoming content? See who the next guests are going to be. Perhaps you'd like to take part in a discussion about esports with me. Well, any and all of the above exclusives are available for my patrons, so put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link below.